All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Sunnie. I'm a research scientist at Apple in the Human-Centered Machine Intelligence and Responsible AI group. Earlier this year, I completed my PhD in computer science at Princeton University, and today my talk is going to be about fostering appropriate reliance on large language models, and it's largely based on work I did during my PhD. Let's see. Okay, so in my view, human-AI complementarity requires appropriate reliance, which you can think of as relying on accurate AI outputs and not relying on inaccurate AI outputs. Under-reliance can lead users to ineffectively use AI and miss out on the potential benefits that it could offer, but over-reliance can lead to low-quality interactions, even unsafe ones when users are using AI in high-stakes settings, as in these real examples. Mitigating risks from inappropriate reliance on AI is also a priority in AI policy and governance. I'm going to skip these quotes, but they do all recognize that inappropriate reliance on AI can lead to disastrous outcomes, both at the individual user level and at the societal level. So it brings us to the question, well, how can we foster appropriate reliance on AI? Prior work has explored various approaches from effectively onboarding users during their initial interactions to providing information like explanations and uncertainty information to employing cognitive forcing functions. But much of this work has been done on traditional AI models like specialized classification models, and we know relatively little about how these approaches would translate for the more recent generative AI, like large language models, that have these different characteristics. They tend to be general purpose, natural language-based, interactive, and surrounded by public excitement, all of which can influence users' reliance. And I'm not saying that these approaches will never seamlessly translate and have the exact same effects. I think the main issue is that we don't know, which brings me to my next slide, which argues for the importance of conducting thoughtful empirical studies on user perceptions and behaviors. So these past few years, I've been looking at the effects of different LLM behaviors and portrayals on user reliance and related aspects. And in this work, in this talk, I'm going to focus on the first one. Okay, so when we were starting this project, we actually realized that the human LLM interaction space is quite new and vast. So what we did was we actually started with a qualitative think aloud study to understand what to even evaluate when it comes to thinking about factors that shape users' reliance. So we did this because qualitative studies can help us understand or identify what to evaluate and why. We did this by recruiting participants of diverse LLM knowledge and use and having them solve question answering tasks through multi-turn interactions with ChatGPT. And the task was basically determining the correct answer to questions with objectively correct answers. So things like general domain factual questions, health and legal domain factual questions, and math questions. And after analyzing the think aloud and the behavioral data, we identified 3 features of LLM responses that seem to be affecting user reliance. So these were the LLM's explanations of its answers, inconsistencies in the explanations, so sets of statements that cannot be true at the same time, and finally, sources that they could click on to verify the provided information. And after identifying these features, we then designed a controlled experiment to isolate and study the effects of these features on user reliance and related aspects. Here, the study context is quite similar, but instead of letting participants engage in multi-turn interactions, we actually just showed one LLM response that we created in advance for full controllability. So quick slide on methods. We designed a 2x2x2 within subjects design study where we manipulated the presence of the LLM-generated explanation, the presence of sources, and the LLM answer correctness. We did not manipulate the presence of inconsistencies, but analyze whether they existed in the LLM responses that we created. And we created these different versions of LLM responses by prompting state-of-the-art applications, ChatGPT and Perplexity AI. But two things I want to note here. One is the term explanation here just refers to supporting details for the answer in line with everyday usage of the term. These are not necessarily faithful explanations of why or how the system output the answer that it did. These are just outputs from ChatGPT. But in our study, we did observe that participants often assumed and interpreted that these were faithful explanations from the system. And another point I want to make is that the sources used in our experiment tended to provide accurate and relevant information. So just keep that in mind when you're interpreting the results. Here's a quick screenshot of what our tasks look like. So participants completed 8 of these. As you can see, there was a task question, some version of an LLM response, and then they had to select what they think is the correct answer to the task question and answer a series of other questions aimed to collect their confidence level in their answer, their evaluation of the LLM's response, and also whether or not they would like to ask a follow-up question after seeing some version of the LLM response. Okay, so drawing from prior work in HCI and psychology, we used a mix of behavioral and self-report variables. Our main measure of reliance is the agreement between the participant's final answer and the LLM's answer, but we also collected a number of other variables, like the accuracy of their final answer, their time on task, whether or not they clicked on the sources that were provided, their self-reported confidence in their answer, their evaluation of the LLM responses, justification quality and actionability, and finally, whether or not they wrote a follow-up question they would like to ask the LLM, and then conducted a number of these analyses. So moving on to the results, the first thing we found was that explanations tended to increase reliance, both appropriate reliance on correct LLM answers and inappropriate reliance on incorrect LLM answers. I'm showing you plots of participants' accuracy when they received different types of LLM responses, and we're focusing on accuracy here because it could give you a quick sense of the appropriateness of reliance. So here, high accuracy would be a sign of appropriate reliance, while low accuracy when the LLM was incorrect would be a sign of over-reliance. And if you compare participants' accuracy when they received responses without an explanation and with an explanation, you can see that their accuracy is higher when the LLM is correct and lower when the LLM is incorrect, suggesting mixed effects of explanations. So I don't think this is new, right? Like over the years, we've been seeing that explanations, whether they are good in quality or relevant, often has this effect of increasing reliance on AI or anything that they're explaining. I think the more interesting bits were this tension that we found between participants' subjective ratings and appropriate reliance. So we saw that explanations tended to increase participants' confidence in their own answer, as well as their evaluation of the responses, justification, quality, and actionability, even when the LLM answer is incorrect. And I think there are several implications of these findings. So one is, if you think about how modern LLMs are trained, they're often fine-tuned on human feedback data that tends to be a collection of, people's subjective ratings on dimensions like helpfulness and preference. And I think our results suggest that optimizing LLMs for these dimensions may lead to over-reliance. And I think it also raises the question, should explanations be always provided? Currently, a lot of state-of-the-art systems tend to be quite explanatory and verbose in nature, but maybe that doesn't have to be the default design choice, especially when the users are asking a difficult question or there is high uncertainty associated with the answer. On a more optimistic note, we did find that sources can help foster appropriate reliance. So when participants receive sources, their accuracy was always higher. And even if we break down the same data as a function of both explanation and sources, we consistently see that the effects of sources are positive. But I do want to remind again that the sources used in our experiments tended to be accurate and relevant. But there has been prior work, right, that has found that sources provided by LLMs may be inaccurate, irrelevant, or fake, really calling for future research that investigates the effects of source quality in addition to source presence, which is what we did in our work. But when sources are expected to be accurate and relevant, providing them seems to be a great idea, as well as making fact-checking easy through different mechanisms. We had some ideas like showing excerpts and quotes, but we didn't test them in this particular work. The final result from this work is that inconsistencies in explanation helped reduce over-reliance induced by explanation. So here I'm showing you participants' accuracy when they receive different types of incorrect LLM responses. And you can see that their accuracy was lowest when the explanation was consistent, and participants' accuracy was highest when the explanation was inconsistent, highlighting this unexpected positive effect of inconsistencies, which we found interesting because inconsistency is not something that's usually thought of as desirable, right? Like, I don't think a system designer would intentionally try to make their system more inconsistent. But I think it does raise the point that, well, first, I do think this is interesting because it is a new unreliability cues in AI outputs that are connected to LLM's characteristics like stochasticity and natural language modality. But I think it also generally just raises this question, like we should be studying what other unreliability cues exist for LLMs and other modern applications. And also think about interventions that can help foster appropriate reliance and help by helping users detect and reason about these different unreliability cues. So obviously, LLM's explanations, sources, and inconsistencies are some of the factors that can be influencing users' reliance. So I have been continuing this line of work to expand our understanding on this topic. So to briefly introduce you to some of this other work, we've also looked at the effects of LLMs expressing uncertainty with and without using personal pronouns, largely motivated by the AI community's high interest and active calls for LLMs to express their uncertainty, although there exists relatively little research on how to express uncertainty and when to do this and when this is beneficial for users as we move into the LLM context. So here we compared participants' reactions when they received LLM responses that are not uncertain, uncertain in the first-person perspective, uncertain in the general perspective, or did not receive an LLM response. And in short, we found that uncertainty expression led to less over-reliance and more cautious user behaviors, like taking longer time on tasks and reporting more reliance on other informational sources. But we did find that perspective mattered. So uncertainty expressions in the first-person perspective had much stronger effects than uncertainty expressions in the general perspective, highlighting that seemingly small choices like the perspective of the expression also makes a difference in human LLM interaction. And the final work, actually, in this work, we looked at the effects of different portrayals. So we're no longer really thinking about model or system characteristics, but about public communication and different messagings that people can encounter in their day-to-day lives. And as a first step towards this question, we actually created 3 different 5-minute videos that portrayed LLMs differently. So in one video, they were portrayed as machines. In another video, they were portrayed as tools. And the final video portrayed them as social companions. And participants saw one of the 3 videos or didn't see a video. And then we measured what mental capacities they attribute to LLMs and also their reliance behaviors. And we found that companion portrayals led to higher attribution of cognitive and emotional capacities. So being able to do things like telling right from wrong, having intentions, having a personality, and so on. But the machine portrayal did lead to less over-reliance, especially when the LLM responses were inconsistent. All in all, I do think measuring and mitigating over-reliance is a really important research direction, and recently had a chance to collaborate on a position paper on this topic. Kevin, who's a co-author, is also in the audience. And it covers many dimensions, from a brief history of over-reliance research to individual and societal risks, factors influencing it, as well as ways to go about measuring and mitigating it. So check it out if you're interested. I really do hope more researchers work on this topic. And that brings me to the end of the talk. Just wanted to thank all my collaborators and happy to take questions.
Does anyone have a question?
Hi, interesting talk. I actually got a little bit interested in one of the things you mentioned. I agree with you that there's scope for research on unreliability cues. And I was wondering if you have some idea about like existing work there, and like when you bring forth that idea, like what exactly do you have in your mind? Is it like cues regarding like the output of LLMs? Is it cues regarding how the LLM converses with you? I think it's a vast area, but like not sure what would be a good place to start.
Yes.
Sorry if it's a very vague question, but it just got me thinking. Thanks.
Yeah, I agree that it's a vast area, and there probably exists a longer list of unreliability cues, as these are more like open-ended and conversational. I think inconsistencies, like various forms, are one. Like I know Yunju, who's in the audience, like she's been looking at inconsistencies in LLM outputs across like different generation turns. So sometimes it says yes. If you prompt it again, it might say no. So that's like one place you can start. I think other things like, text is so vast, and how do you evaluate good text? How do you evaluate good arguments? Like, what are different markers of good and convincing, like responses versus not? I think this ties a little into like the persuasion literature and what we heard earlier from Tom and others. But I do think, I would look into a lot of like what makes a good writing, or what makes something persuasive, reliable. But I'll also think of more resources, because I definitely had a list of papers that were looking at unreliability cues in more like traditional classification models. So it'd be interesting to think through like what still applies and what would be additional spaces we should explore. Yeah.
Let's thank our speaker one more time.